Yes, I know, another Mustang GT review. But hear me out. Even though the S550 Mustang GT is on its way out, I think it's going to stay relevant for a while. My name's Nish, you're watching The Word on Cars. Let me explain why I think the S550 is far from done. So, the S550 Mustang GT has been around since 2017, and it's not just Australia's most popular sports car, it's been a global hit. And that's because Ford made style and performance affordable and accessible to people like you and I. So much so that I own a 2017 Mustang GT, which over the years I've modified into an 800 horsepower monster. Now, I was never a Mustang guy. I've always appreciated American muscle, but I'd never had an interest in buying into it. That was until I got behind the wheel of a GT, and I knew instantly that I was going to join the club. The Mustang isn't just a car. When you buy Mustang, you buy into the history and legacy of what is an icon. When you say the words Ford Mustang, everyone knows what you're talking about. Aside from the history, the Mustang doesn't just look the part of a performer, it is a performer. The Mustang has always put power, performance and style in the hands of the common man or woman, and the S550 did exactly that, with a naturally aspirated 5-litre V8 Coyote engine under the hood, and this one being a post-refresh car, gets 339 kilowatts and 556 newton meters of torque, compared to pre-refresh models with 306 kilowatts and 530 newton meters of torque, through either a 6-speed manual or 10-speed automatic, which is bonkers when you consider the GT cost under 63,000 Australian dollars when new. With the S650 Mustang GT around the corner, you would think that the S550 would start to become irrelevant, but the new S650 will set you back less than 90 grand before options, and that's a lot of money, especially when you consider the global economy at the moment. So the new Mustang isn't as affordable as the old Mustang was, which is why I think the S550 GT will continue to be relevant to those of you out there that want a piece of American muscle. And Mustang GT prices have held strong since its release in 2015, and it's looking like it'll stay that way. These days, the second-hand market is littered with used GTs, but this one, which is for sale at Blinker here in Melbourne, is priced incredibly well and happens to be the cheapest you can buy from a dealer here in Victoria. And even though this GT is out of its factory warranty, Blinker will include a 3-year warranty for anyone that mentions that they saw this GT on The Word on Cars. Styling-wise, this GT being a post-refresh model gets an aggressive front end with slimmer and sharper headlamps with shark gill daytime running lights, an updated bumper bar, a pronounced splitter and bonnet vents to extract heat from under the hood compared to pre-facelifted models. The side profile of the Mustang, on the other hand, hasn't changed since 2015. You'll find the same side skirt extensions, same 19-inch staggered wheels, which still look great by the way, wrapped in Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tyres, 255s on the front and 275s on the back. Pre-facelifted models from 2015 had Pirelli P0s, which were terrible. And the same ginormous Brembo brakes. We'll talk about those later. The rear end of the Mustang also got minor changes by way of updated tail lamp housings that are sharper and angular, and an updated rear diffuser compared to the 2015 model. And while we're on the diffuser, the 2018 GT also got an active exhaust, including a quiet mode to sneak home without waking up the neighbors, because it's loud. It gives poking the beast a whole new meaning. Getting into the Mustang is easy thanks to the smart keyless entry that you'll find on most other Ford products. As long as you have the key on you, you can wrap your hand around the door handle and the GT will unlock. You can also use the key fob, which is standard issue Ford, to unlock the doors, pop the boot and roll up or down the windows. Now, being a two-door, you get long doors that open up to give anyone of any size enough room to get in and out. But being a coupe, it does sit lower to the ground, so you'll find you need to drop yourself into the seat. And the Mustang also gets illuminated door sills, which are tied into Ford's My Color feature. So you can change the color of the interior ambient lighting to whatever floats your boat. Dropping into the driver's seat of the Mustang, the first thing you notice is that there is a lot of plastic in here. Even though it's not a refined interior, it's very much Mustang and part of the American muscle charm. Having said that, over the years, Ford has been updating the interior of the Mustang, and the new S650 is again a step ahead of the interior of the S550. You do get soft touch surfaces where it matters, along with painted inserts that look like brushed aluminium and chrome trimmings here and there. The Mustang also gets a leather look interior with grey stitching on the seats and door cards. The seats themselves have electric adjustments for the base, while the backrest needs to be adjusted manually and are designed for all shapes and sizes. They're wide and comfortable. Not ideal for days at the track, and Ford did include optional Recaro bucket seats for anyone that wanted body-hugging seats, but you have to give up the heating and cooling that the standard seats come with. And the Mustang being fairly large for a coupe means there's plenty of headroom and legroom for both the driver and passenger up front. Now, tech-wise, the facelifted GT got the same Sync 3 infotainment system with an 8-inch touchscreen as the 2015 model, which works brilliantly. It includes the usual features we've come to expect, is simple to use and responsive, and includes wide Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Ford also threw in knobs to control volume and tuning, a few quick access buttons, and a CD slot under the screen. Yes, you heard me right, the GT still has a CD slot. And on music, the Mustang gets a Shaker Pro 12-speaker stereo complete with a subwoofer in the boot, which sounds okay, it's got highs, mids and lows, but lacks the clarity of a more refined system. Ford did include a B&O Play system as an option, but this one will please most people out there. Now, you can control climate control through the infotainment screen, but the Mustang also includes a full panel of buttons and toggles to make things easier, including buttons for the seat heating and cooling I mentioned earlier. You'll need to use a screen to turn on the heated steering wheel though. There isn't a physical button for that. Under the climate controls and in front of the transmission lever, which in this car is an automatic and works like any other automatic shifter with a sport mode for the gearbox, there's a row of toggles along with the start-stop button that look like they came out of a P-51 Mustang fighter plane. To change drive modes from normal, my mode, which is an individual mode, Sport Plus, Racetrack, Drag Strip and Snow Wet, steering modes from normal, sport and comfort, turn off traction control and turn the hazards on. And while we're here, the Mustang also gets an old school handbrake which anyone hitting the track in this thing will appreciate. My only complaint about this is that Ford didn't move it over to the driver's side when they converted the Mustang for right-hand drive markets, so it feels a little too far away. Can't have everything. Post-refresh Mustangs also got a 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster that replaced the analog dials and helper screen in previous models. The cluster shows all the standard information you would expect, as well as a ton of performance information, and can be personalized. And in normal, Sport Plus and Racetrack drive modes, the cluster will change its appearance to suit the occasion. You can also set up My Mode, like I mentioned, which is an individual mode to set up engine, transmission, steering, exhaust, and suspension where Magna Ride is equipped, which this one doesn't have, through the Mustang button on the steering wheel. And on the steering wheel, you get 22 buttons for all you button lovers out there to control pretty much everything you could think of. The steering wheel itself is classic in design with a thin and perfectly round rim, brushed aluminium looking spokes, and tilt and reach adjustment. Now, driver assistance wise, Ford threw a few safety systems into the 2018 Mustang thanks to the 2-star safety rating the Mustang got in Australia due to low scores for child occupant protection and lack of safety assist systems. There's emergency braking, adaptive cruise control, driver attention detection, and active lane keeping. It's not much, but it was enough to bump up the safety rating to 3 stars. And lastly, we have the storage up front, which is plentiful for a coupe. There's a good sized glove box on the dashboard with a hidden compartment to store the owner's manual, a felt-lined compartment that slides out of the dashboard on the driver's side for sunglasses, a space for phones or smaller items in front of the gear lever, which includes a USB-A port and 12-volt power outlet, 2 cup holders on the center console, which will get in the way with cups or bottles in them with a manual transmission, more storage under the center armrest, which is rubber lined, lit and includes a 12-volt power outlet and USB-A port, and door bins that run the full length of the doors. Like I said, plenty of space. Then there's the back seats in the Mustang. In the interest of being honest here, I've had my Mustang for 7 years now and I've never sat in the back other than crawling around to clean. Back here, everything is again plastic, but unlike the front, only the backs of the seats and front center armrest are padded. But for those that need a pair of jump seats for emergencies or kids, these will do the trick. Getting in isn't too easy though. You'll need to pull the latch on the back side of the seat, which also includes map pockets and coat hooks on both headrests, and use the switch to slide the seat forward. Once you're in, it's no surprise that headroom isn't all that great back here. I'm 5 feet 9 inches, so if you're any taller, you're going to struggle. There's also bugger all knee room back here with the seat set to my driving position. I've actually had to move it forward just to squeeze in, although there's enough space to slide my feet under the front seats. The Mustang gets 2 separate seats back here that are more like bucket seats, so you do sink into them. They're actually quite comfortable even for a long drive, if you're a smaller human being that is. The seats also get Isofix and top tether mounts for baby or booster seats, with plenty of room in between the seats to keep the kids separated on those long weekend drives the GT was built for. Being a GT car or Grand Tourer, Cargo space is also decent in the Mustang for those long weekend drives. There's 408 litres of space back here, which can be increased by dropping the 50-50 split rear seats for more space. You'll need to squeeze yourself into the back seats to pull the latches to do that though. The Mustang also gets more space under the floor in the spare wheel well, where you'll find the tyre inflator and fix-a-flat kit. A space saver spare was an optional extra. And a word of advice, the Mustang, unlike other cars, doesn't detect that the key fob has been left in the boot. So make sure you don't leave it in a jacket or handbag and close the boot lid. Believe me, I've learned the hard way. So, driving the Mustang GT. Now I must say, I love my GT, but sometimes it's nice to get into a stock Mustang and just enjoy it. And it is such an enjoyable car because the Coyote under the hood of this car, as I said, it's got 339 kilowatts of power, 556 Newton meters of torque. It is so rev happy. You put your foot into it and it just... It's like having a right foot connected to a freight train. It just goes. It's sensational power, and like I said, it's rev happy. It loves to rev. The post facelift models rev up over 7,000 RPM, which is brilliant. It is a bit of a rough and tumble engine though, because it's not as refined as what you would find coming out of the European brands, but that's what a Mustang is. It's not about refinement. It's about just brutish, raw, unadulterated power in a coupe. And the Mustang is perfect in that sense. It does exactly what you expect a Mustang to do. It is exactly what American muscle is all about. And I mean, the noise. That really doesn't get old. Now, I'm just driving this thing in Sport Plus, so the exhaust isn't even in its loudest setting. So what you're hearing isn't as loud as it goes. 0 to 100 in this car is 4.3 seconds, which is respectable these days. But when we're talking about numbers, the one thing that does let this car down is the fuel consumption, which is 12.7 litres per 100 kilometers. Now, it is expected. If you're buying a V8, you're not buying it to save the world or save fuel. So you are going to pay for fuel when you're behind the wheel of this Mustang, but you know what? Every dollar you spend on fuel in this thing is absolutely worth it. I mean, it is sensationally fun. So then we have the 10-speed automatic in this car, which is actually quite good. It works really well when you're grand touring. And I say that because in drive, when you're pushing this thing around corners, it does freak out a little bit. And when I say freak out, it doesn't necessarily know which gear you want to go into, but it's not really a unusual problem to have in an automatic gearbox. It does also have 10 speeds, which is probably far too many, but I understand Ford probably threw them in to try and bring those fuel consumption numbers down, which again makes sense. When you're dawdling around, like I said, as a daily driver, it works fantastically in drive. But stick it into sport mode and use the paddle shifters, put this into Sport Plus, and this thing just comes alive. Gear changes are super aggressive. Every gear change, it's kind of like bang, bang. You feel it. You physically feel the gear changes, which I love. I think that's sensational. It really adds to the overall feel of a sports car. It feels raw, it feels visceral. Like I said, it's a Mustang. So, while we're on the topic of transmissions, my Mustang GT has the infamous MT82 manual gearbox. Now, over the years, the MT82 has copped a lot of grief from the whole world, really. And to be honest, it's not perfect. It is clunky, it's not refined, it's not precise. But you do need to learn how to drive the MT82, and once you get the hang of it, it's perfectly fine. And you can also add some modification to it, like a short throw shifter, which my Mustang has, which certainly improves the feel of the MT82. It works fine. Is it perfect? It's not. If you are looking for a Mustang and you're sort of on the fence as to whether you buy an automatic or a manual, my advice is, if you're going to be daily driving your car, get the automatic 10-speed. But if you're buying the car for the weekends, definitely get the manual. Then we have steering in the Mustang GT. Now, this is another one of those things that's copped a bit of heat over the years, because the steering in this car isn't bad, but there is certainly a bit of vagueness that comes through the steering wheel. I mean, it changes directions quite well, and you can push it through a corner, and it definitely point and shoot, really, it works. But there is definitely some vagueness off center. You can't necessarily tell what the front wheels are doing at all times. It doesn't take away from the overall enjoyment you get from this car though, because as I said, you can go around a corner in this thing. The steering does get a few different modes as well. In comfort, it's quite light, so easy to dawdle around or daily drive. Normal seems to be the middle ground there, which is a little bit stiffer. And then you've got sport, which is a lot more stiffer. Now, even in sport, it's not overly stiff. It just gives you enough stiffness to give you confidence when you are pushing this thing around a corner, so you feel a bit more planted, feel a bit more secure. Steering overall, I think, works okay for the price point of this car and for what it is. Again, it is an American muscle car, and there are certain things that are not going to be perfect. That's going to be expected. But in the interest of being honest, the steering could definitely do with a little bit of tuning, but overall, I think most people are going to really have a good time behind the wheel of this car because you can do that. In terms of suspension in the Mustang GT, this one doesn't actually get Ford's MagneRide system, which I mentioned earlier. Now, MagneRide is basically adaptive dampers. Depending on the drive mode you're in, the suspension will either soften itself up in normal modes or stiffen itself up in Sport Plus or racetrack modes. And MagneRide is tried and tested. It works brilliantly. Now, this GT, as I said, doesn't have MagneRide, but it still works quite well. The spring rates are a little bit on the stiffer side, but it's well balanced for a car that would be a daily driver or a car for the weekends. It works quite well, it's composed, and the Mustang isn't light. The Mustang weighs over 1,700 kilograms, and it manages that weight quite well. There is very little lean when you are pushing this thing around a corner, and when you do put your foot into this thing in a straight line, it just hunkers down and shoots forward. A lot of people ask me how I put 800 horsepower down to the ground. The Mustang suspension is actually quite good at doing that. Now, granted, I have some upgrades in my suspension, but this thing with the 339 kilowatts, well and truly capable of doing that. Now, while we're on the topics of steering and suspension, there is one thing I need to address, and it's this idea that Mustangs come out of Cars and Coffee events and go sideways into crowds. Let me just be clear about this. This has nothing to do with the Mustang itself. Sure, the steering in this thing could be better, the suspension isn't too bad, but it really comes back down to the price of a Mustang. Because what Ford's done, as I said, is make this really affordable and accessible to people. And some of those people are inexperienced. I've had my Mustang for 7 years now, and I've never come out of an event and gone sideways into any crowds, nor have I even tried to be honest with you. At the end of the day, the Mustang in itself isn't a bad car. I mean, there are plenty of other cars on the internet, on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram that you see coming out of events going sideways, cars like Lamborghinis that you would expect to be cars that handle really well. But Mustang's no different. At the end of the day, if you put someone behind the wheel of a Mustang, especially considering how much power this thing has and the cost of it, you're going to be asking for trouble. So people, stop ragging on the Mustang. It's not the Mustang. Brakes in the Mustang GT are sensational. Now, over here in Australia, all of our cars are performance pack cars when it comes to the S550 Mustang. So all of our cars got the Brembo brakes. You get 6 piston calipers up front with 380mm discs that are vented and 330mm discs on the back that are also vented with single piston calipers. And look, they work brilliantly. My Mustang GT with 800 horsepower, they're still running the same brakes because, to be honest with you, it doesn't need to be upgraded. Even with that level of power, the brakes are perfectly fine at bringing this thing to a grinding halt when you need it to, or when you're going around corners. The pedal feel is great, very progressive. There is a little bit of grab when you first put your foot on the brake, but I mean, that's intentional. That is the way the brakes are meant to operate, and they operate really, really well. Now, what I will say though is they're probably not the best for track day use. The calipers are fine, but the discs themselves, you'll probably find that they will warp and wear down even if you warm them up or warm them down. And look, they might last for a little while, but if you are tracking a car or taking the car to the track, then I suggest getting some better discs for this car. But overall, as a daily driver, car for the weekends that you're just gonna have some fun in, brakes are absolutely brilliant. Safety tech wise, Ford threw a whole lot of safety systems into the post-refresh Mustang GT. This car The pre-refresh Mustang had no safety technologies at all, so much so that it got a 2-star ANCAP safety rating here in Australia, as I mentioned. With the safety tech, it bumped it up to 3 stars, so still not great, but at least we have things like adaptive cruise control now, active lane keeping. What I will say about those systems though is the adaptive cruise control does not have stop and go, so it won't bring the car to a full stop. It's probably better suited for a freeway where you are moving along with traffic. You might need to slow down, but you don't come to a full stop. And the active lane keeping will only really work over 60 kilometers an hour. So you've got those systems. You do still miss out on things that are basic, like blind spot monitoring or rear cross traffic alert that you find in most cars these days. But hey, you can't knock Ford for trying. You still have a few of those systems, so you're just gonna have to make do with those. So, having owned a Mustang GT for the last 7 years, I have a soft spot for this muscle car. And even though it has style, performance, and even comfort, my love for this pony has nothing to do with any of that. Instead, what I love most about the Mustang is that it's an underdog and full of character in a world where everything's a little clinical. And yes, there are faster sports cars out there, but it doesn't matter because behind the wheel of this thing, you feel like Steve McQueen. For anyone that doesn't know who he is, Google. And for those of you out there, like me, that can't help yourselves when it comes to modifying, the Mustang GT is a solid platform with loads of aftermarket parts to choose from, whether you're looking for a unique look, track day handling, or more power than you know what to do with. Like I said, the S550 is definitely not done winning hearts, so if you're planning on test driving an S550 Mustang GT after watching this video, just be prepared to fall in love with this American icon.